I'm Christy.
And I'm Kathy.
And this is The Psychic
And the Skeptic. Welcome back to The Psychic and the Skeptic. And on this episode, we will be diving into one of the most haunted eras of American history, the Civil War.
Yes, this is like my all-time favorite point in history ever. I just love the Civil War.
Right, and I remember visiting Gettysburg when I was 10 years old and just being fascinated with the history and all of the reenactment and the relics that are still there. It's truly a living and extensive outdoor museum if we are talking about the battlefield for Gettysburg in particular.
And I will say too, I believe I lived in the Civil War era in another life.
In a past life?
I think so.
Really?
Because
you're just drawn to it?
Very much, very much. And did you know that Oklahoma actually has a little bit of Civil War history?
Yes, actually, there's a fort where I think it was a stop-off for people traveling to go fight.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't think
Washita.
there were... Yes,
Fort Washita.
Fort Washita. Yep.
I've been there and investigated. This was before you came on our team.
We've talked about that before. We visited as part of an activity my son needed to do for a Boy Scout activity. And I remember it was closed, so we had to look in from outside. I've always meant to go back, but we did a lot of the research on that history, and there was a mention of its involvement with the Civil War, although there weren't any battles for the Civil War in our state, in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
But I've visited a POW camp in Georgia when I lived there for some time. And in your travels across the U.S., going from here to there, you sometimes see those little historical markers that mention the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And for our international listeners, they've probably heard of it as well, because there's civil wars that happen in many countries, some that are still ongoing to this day. And yet America also has its own Civil War history.
And speaking of that, the Civil War is known as America's most bloodiest war ever, fought on our own soil with the most lives and casualties lost.
I would believe that for sure, based on what we've learned in school and what we've seen in museums.
Yeah, and when we were talking about Fort Washita a minute ago, it's now owned by the Chickasaw Nation.
Right. Because
I was trying to get back in it. But I will tell you, when we were there, we got great stuff recorded.
I remember you talking about it. Yeah, for sure.
I would love to go back there eventually.
Yeah, that'd be great. Even if we were just visiting the museum, just to get the vibe. And that's all part of some of what we're going to talk about, the vibe of these places and just going and visiting. Is this paranormal, or is this just a play on our emotions, knowing the history and how extensive it is for our country?
I do believe that there is a lot of residual energy with some of these Civil War battle sites. I really do. I also feel like, though, there could be some high potential for some intelligent hauntings, no doubt.
Yeah, and based on what we have learned over the years working together and having that skeptical mindset, there are some things that are really hard to debunk. But that's some of what we're going to talk about in our episode. And this, for sure, is going to be more than one part.
Oh, yeah.
We've had lots of conversation about how do we cover the Civil War. We even hesitated even starting on it right now, because we could probably make an entire different podcast strictly about the Civil War if we really wanted to get into it. But we want to highlight some of the battles. We want to cover the timeline, talk about the history, talk about the potential for paranormal that exists based on the history alone, and dive into evidence that's out there that's reported to be evidence, some things that have gone viral, and discuss how it's been debunked or how it's really difficult or a stretch to debunk certain other pieces of, quote, evidence that are out there.
And I will tell you, when we talk about the Civil War, we're talking about those dates. For some people who aren't aware of all the dates or know much about it, it's between 1861 and 1865. And in this war, over 600,000 soldiers died in brutal battles fought across different things like farms, towns, forests. And this war, of course, raged on for 4 years, sometimes known as the Blue and the Gray or the North and the South. Those are some nicknames for it. But I would love to take a trip one day, not so much for the Civil War ghost tours, but I just would like to see the historical sites.
Right.
And I'll put my little psychic feelers out there to see what I pick up on or what I see.
Right. And I'd love to go back and see Gettysburg, for example, because I was 10 years old. It was the 1980s. And I respected it and knew a little bit about the history at the time, but I was so young. And it's kind of like you need to revisit some of those places now that you have matured and grown and learned and lived and come with a different perspective. But I want to see the haunted places too.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought a little show and tell with me to the pod today for recording just 2 little souvenirs that I got and still have from when I was 10 years old, visiting one of the gift shops at Gettysburg. And they had this section where you could purchase some old Civil War bullets. I guess just
real.
Over the years, they found them all out in the fields.
Oh.
And they're made of solid lead. And the guy at the store helped me figure out one of the bullets is from the north and one is from the south. So I'm like, oh yes, I'm buying one of each.
Ooh, I'm going to have to hold those and just see which one. See what they feel like.
They're pretty heavy, and there's a stain on the one from the north that the guy, he couldn't tell me because I'm like 10. I'm like, is that blood?
That's why I don't know. That may be why. I feel like there is a higher vibration on the northern bullet.
Yeah.
Rather than the Union bullet.
Yeah, you did say that before we
Confederate.
got recording here.
Mm-hmm.
It's got some kind of stain on it that he said could be blood. It could also be from the soil, but the whole thing was buried in the dirt. So you would think, I don't know, it doesn't look like rust. It's got some corrosion on it. And we can certainly put a picture out there. I don't know if anybody listening, maybe they have these too, because this was just in a small bucket and you can just pick out the ones you wanted. And yeah, so I figured I'd bring it up here as a little vibe, maybe.
Yeah.
To have. Just
Set the mood.
Set the mood.
Yeah, let's definitely post some pictures of your bullets on our Facebook and Instagram page.
My own little Civil War history right here.
Hey, at least you've been, so that's cool. To at least one of the sites. Even out east, I know this is not Civil War, but where you're from, man, I would love to go see a lot of those. Like, it's on my bucket list.
Yeah.
But I would like to go see a lot of those historical sites.
Right. And you can't really be, I would say, a thorough paranormal investigator without having some love for the history, because it's the foundation of what sets up the potential for paranormal activity. And the locations of some of these battles that we're going to talk about in this series are some of the most famous haunted sites in America.
And I will say, history is important, like what you were talking about, and it is appreciated. We've had people that wrote into us just telling us they appreciate how we bring in the historical aspects of that.
Well, we're going to give them an earful this time.
Oh, we are. Well, how can you not when you cover
Right?
the Civil War?
And what time is it? It's para-history time.
Of course. Come on. We cannot have our podcast without having some history to it. So what was the Civil War really all about, and why did it even have to begin? So one of the misconceptions that a lot of people think is that it was all about just slavery. Not true. While slavery was a huge part of it, that wasn't all to the war, the reasons for the war. So you did have slavery, though, I will mention that, and territorial expansion. So prior to this, you had what was the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and that was created so that way the areas could expand for transcontinental railroad, but also as the states started to expand, agriculture was a big thing, and big crops that grew in the South, like cotton, tobacco, things like that. The Southern plantation owners, or these farmers, they would rely on slave labor to be able to get those big cash crops in to sell.
Right.
So they did not like when the North was saying, hey, everybody should be free, because then they lost their help. Now, there was also a thing that happened with states' rights. And the South was trying to say, well, okay, if we become these joined states. And if something comes up that we don't like, or if we feel like our rights are threatened, then we have the right to legally leave this union. There was also economic differences that occurred. So the industrial North, and that's the thing, you had a lot of farmers that were in the South, and then you had a lot of the North who had already started the industrial or the machine age. Inventions were starting to happen. And so the North supported having these tariffs placed to protect these businesses, but the agricultural South opposed them. And the South, they thought, uh-oh, this is going to harm our trade. We don't want to do that. So like the North and the South, the states, they're already getting ready to go to war, right? Or they want to go to war. But with the election of President Abraham Lincoln on November the 6th of 1860, the South saw this as a real big threat. And it was pretty much the final straw for them. And one by one, you start seeing some of these southern states break off from the Union. So there's going to be a total of 11 states altogether. But the first one on December 20th of 1860 was South Carolina. And then there's 6 others who end up breaking off by early 1861. So now the North and the South are divided. You have what's known as the Union states, and then you have the Confederate states. Then there's this big trigger event. You have the battle at Fort Sumter. Now, this conflict started when the Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in Charleston Bay, South Carolina on April the 12th, 1861. This is the official start of the Civil War. Right afterwards, to respond to this attack, President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers, mind you, to suppress the rebellion. And then that also caused 4 more states to actually join the Confederacy.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So you can see how this is starting to divide the country to whose side some of the states are on and whose side they're not.
So just asking for volunteers to fight caused 4 more states. Mm-hmm. So that's how we got the 11 states in the Confederacy.
Correct.
So the Battle of Fort Sumter. This is the opening shot of the Civil War. And this battle transformed a political crisis into a full-scale war and later gave rise to some of America's most enduring ghost legends. So, Union Major Robert Anderson had secretly moved his small garrison of about 85 men from a vulnerable Fort Moultrie into Fort Sumter. This was a stronger position in the harbor, and Confederate forces had surrounded the fort, preparing to force them to surrender. So at 4:30 in the morning on April 12, 1861, Confederate batteries opened fire under orders from PGT Beauregard. More than 3,000 shells were fired during the assault, and the battle lasted about 34 hours, so well into April 13th.
Wow.
Anderson's forces returned fire but were badly outgunned. No soldiers were killed during the battle itself, and this is important to know based on some of the paranormal claims, because some of the areas where there's not really a whole lot of activity could be explained because not every battle was as bloody as what we hear about in history. So the fort did catch fire, ammunition ran low, and the Union position became untenable. So on April 13th, 1861, Anderson agreed to evacuate, but before departing, he requested a traditional 100-gun salute to the U.S. flag. Woohoo! This ceremony led to the battle's only fatalities. So during this salute, a spark ignited stored gunpowder cartridges, and a massive explosion occurred on the 47th shot. So Union Private Daniel Hough was killed instantly. Several others were severely wounded, and Private Hough was the first fatality of the American Civil War. The salute was cut short and Union troops evacuated.
See, if Anderson hadn't been so, what's the word for it?
Insistent on...
Yes, thank you.
That's a waste of ammunition, but of course this is the first battle, so they don't know
how long it's going to go on.
How this war is going to go, right?
But basically, let's blame
Maybe
Daniel's
that's why we're not
life.
allowed in the military to do any celebratory salutes.
Yeah, and we're going to Daniel's life on Anderson.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Stuff happens.
It does. Unfortunately, this guy's this guy's fate.
But Fort Sumter wasn't done yet, so it did not fade away from history after this event. The Confederates occupied it for nearly 4 years, and Union forces later bombarded it heavily during 1863 to 1865. The fort was largely reduced to rubble, and at least dozens of additional soldiers died during these later assaults. But what also is super important about Fort Sumter is there was a POW camp for Union soldiers. This was in Andersonville, Georgia, and there's a lot of information out there about it. It's a museum and a place that you can visit today. So I went about 20 years ago to look at this site that all in itself has its own history of suffering and tragic death, lots of death, thousands of soldiers in this small open area, no shelter, no proper food, no proper water, were literally just dying and shot if they tried to escape in this one small area.
And you said it's Andersonville?
Andersonville, Georgia.
I wonder if that's named off the idiot Anderson that caused the explosion.
Maybe, potentially.
I just wondered about that as you were
But that was
saying
Anderson, and this is Andersonville, so yes.
Right, but it's
likely.
close.
But this was a village in Sumter County, which is southwest central of Georgia. And I used to live near Macon, Georgia, so it was an easy trip for me to go see. I highly recommend if you're in the area. Actually, if you live in Georgia, you've probably been here, maybe even on a school field trip. But it has its own vibe in that area. You just walk in and just the feeling being there, the solemn quiet that exists in this area. It could just be because it's away from major roads, and knowing what happened there, you feel a deep respect for the lives that were lost there. So it creates that kind of feeling when you're there.
It wasn't a feeling of spooky, ghosty that you were feeling, because I'm going to give you a hard time if you say so, since you're the open
This could
skeptic.
explain why people think that there are ghosts, is because of that feeling that you get anytime you're in a place that has some tragedy. You can't help but feel some emotions, and those emotions can contribute to potential paranormal experiences. But I will say I wasn't a paranormal investigator at this time. This was a little over 20 years ago when I visited, and I wasn't looking for any ghosts. I don't have any memory of anything like that while I was there. And I don't remember any stories about any paranormal activity there. It was really a respectful monument to the people who had died. But there's a little replica of the walls that they had built and the watchtowers that they would shoot at any soldiers that tried to go in this no man's land area. But there was no barracks. They had to find whatever scraps they could to build some kind of structure. There were lots of photos in the museum that showed you some of what they came up with just to get some kind of shelter. And Georgia in the summer is brutal.
Hot. I heard
You've got
hot
the
and
sun
humid.
directly on you. There's probably all kinds of sunstroke, dehydration. You've got poor sanitation. There's a little stream that runs through it that was clearly contaminated. Very little food, fights over food. There was battles within the walls, and these are people who are on the same team.
And I imagine there's lots of diseases too. If the sanitation was limited.
For sure. Gangrene.
Oh,
and-
man.
yes, all kinds. It was horrible. And that kind of environment, clearly, if there's something to any paranormal activity, that would be a hot spot for sure.
So we're going to talk about, as far as Fort Sumter goes, the first documented ghost sighting. Now, these are actually documented from personal letters and things that,
Local accounts,
yeah.
stories passed along over time.
Yes, it's factual than just made up. So we know that there is a large explosion whenever they're doing this salute. The 47th man in the lineup was Private Daniel Hough. And he was an Irish immigrant, and he was proudly serving in his new home. But that day, 47 was just his unlucky number. It's not known whether a hot ember exploded on a nearby pile of cartridges or if his gun just misfired. However, the result was tragic. He was killed instantly in this explosion, and 4 men who were around him were also severely injured. Now, the 100-gun salute was shortened to 50, and then his body was buried there at the fort. His remains were then later relocated to either Magnolia Cemetery in Charleston or back to New York State. But many agree that his soul still lives on forever at Fort Sumter. Now, some of the reported phenomenon there. Let's talk about that. You have visitors and staff. They describe apparitions of a Union soldier. Could this be Daniel? Possibly. They also see a figure saluting the flag at dusk, a phantom smoke or cannon haze, strong smells of sulfur or gunpowder, the sudden oppressive feelings or a chest pressure. And some of these sightings even date back to Confederate soldiers who occupied the fort shortly after the surrender. So again, that would be more of those documented, maybe personal letters or so forth.
So I wonder if they're narrowing it down to this Daniel guy because not many died during that battle.
I'm thinking so.
And they just assume it's him because of how he died and how tragic it was. But that's a lot of claims there. Apparitions and a figure saluting at dusk, those kind of things. But we'll get into some of what the skeptic viewpoint is on some of these claims. But the sudden oppressive feelings or chest pressure concerns me as a nurse. Because
what could that be?
That could be a pending heart attack. It could be angina.
Could be a really bad case of panic, fixing to go into a panic attack.
Well, yeah. If your emotions are high and your heart rate's up and your blood pressure is high, that can cause a little chest pressure for somebody, but I would not call that paranormal for sure.
Especially if you're trying to go out there and feel around for ghosts.
Right.
Your anxiety
when your
is
health
heightened.
is not where it should be, maybe.
But no, back to what you were saying. I think one of the reasons why they attribute it to this ghostly apparition that's being attributed to Daniel is because there's also known as the face in the flag mystery that's there. So there's claims that a stain on the Union storm flag resembles a bearded face, and they said that it really resembles Howe's likeness, and a similar face reportedly also appears on the Confederate flag there.
Well, if you look at a picture of him, he looks really young, like he could barely grow a beard. So I don't know if that's him, according to the picture that we have of what Daniel looked like. He looks like he was a teenager.
Right. Well, maybe that was when he first enlisted, and who knows? There may not be an updated picture of him.
He's in a Civil War uniform, so that picture could not be that old of him.
Yeah. And he's holding his gun. But some skeptics would say, and maybe you would say this, Kathy, I don't really know. But they could argue that, hey, these marks on the flags and stuff is just from aging.
Well, yeah, it's pareidolia.
Damage.
Dirt,
yeah,
and
exactly.
old photos. And
right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting is when you were talking about it being a POW camp at one point, with all that went on, there's no doubt in my mind that while some of it may be residual, it's not just Daniel that could be there. It could be some of these POW soldiers, don't you think?
But that would be isolated to Andersonville right there, because that's where the torture and their death occurred, at that camp. It's a pretty big field that they were held in. It's basically like they were cattle out in an open field, just trapped in this fence. But would their spirit wander beyond those grounds?
Possibly. I don't really feel like the spirit realm has boundaries where they have to stay in a particular place. Some people think cemeteries.
Maybe they were trying to escape and their spirit was able to. And
yeah. Well, like it's the cemetery theory. Some people are like, oh, well, they can't leave the cemetery. Well, if they can't, there's no physical restrictions or spiritual.
If ghosts actually exist, then they can do anything.
Right. They do exist. But here's another reason why I said that, because people that visit there do have some visual encounters, and they see shadow figures that move through the fort. They also see full-body soldiered apparitions, figures that appear and disappear suddenly. They also hear phantom marching sounds, cannon fire echoes, some unexplained noises within the ruins. And then, here's the nurse's thing. You know that olfactory phenomenon?
Yes, the nerve that helps you with smells.
Correct. And you link the smell with the memory. Visitors will say,
part of your brain is actually where you store your memory, and the olfactory nerve is right near it.
Well, they say that they can just suddenly smell black powder and there's no powder around, and then like a smoke scent that fills the air.
Well, see, and I think that might be a power of suggestion. So something that might smell similar to, and you're talking about rural areas here where somebody off in the distance could be cooking something. And because you're thinking about the Civil War and you're out here looking for activity, paranormal activity, that can mess with what your brain wants to see, what you would think and what your memory tells you gunpowder smells like. And you get this smell and it makes that connection and it feels really real, but it's really how your brain plays with your senses and your memory together.
Sure. Well, and even more modern reports of people who's visited, they have said, hey, we've seen ghostly figures saluting the flag. There's also been photos, and I know your take on photos, but they're saying that their photos are marred by blurs or white shapes and sudden physical sensations like that chest pressure previously discussed, and then feelings of being watched. So I guess overall, though, I would say just from the time that Daniel died in this fort, I'm not going to say that Fort Sumter, the ghost that would be there would be just from Daniel. There has to be something else around the area like what you were talking about.
Yeah, lingering from Andersonville, perhaps.
Yes. Because
I would be able to support that theory as an open skeptic, but photographs are really difficult for me. We always talk about that with the pareidolia effect, and we're not there to see the conditions when the photo was captured, to rule those other things out, weather and cool temperatures and breath and mist and stuff like that. And I don't know if the amateur investigator is considering those conditions or what type of camera was used and all of those things. There's too many other factors that could go into explaining it as not paranormal, which is why I almost always lean away from that. It's far easier to debunk it than it is to prove it to be true.
Right. And I'm not saying Fort Sumter isn't haunted. I'm just saying you can't base a haunting off of one soldier's death.
Right.
There's just no way.
The stories and some of the skeptic argument I'll get into as we go through these episodes points towards when these stories started showing up. It says personal letters and things, but it also hints to the fact that this might have started occurring later on when the public was into the paranormal. Think about the time at the turn of the century, the Victorian era, and the obsession people had with death at the time. And their thoughts were all about death and dying. And they're looking back at history. The most recent history at that time was the Civil War, which was 40, 50 years prior. And so all of a sudden all these stories start coming, but there really aren't any accounts from that time of seeing ghosts then, from letters of people who were witnesses to these events.
Right. And you could even look at modern times now. So, back in the early 2000s, you started having this paranormal craze going on. You started
now
having...
you're talking like a skeptic. But that's exactly it, though. That
Right.
A lot of these stories were starting to develop more, even in the 1990s, when you have ghost tourism and people writing books on ghosts of these places. But not much is on Fort Sumter.
Right.
And the argument is because not that many died outside of the POW camp.
Right. And I think the more that you have stuff that comes about, the more that it stirs up people to want to research, look into whatever. So all the paranormal TV shows that came out in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, you had Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures and all these popular shows. And suddenly you just see this influx of, all these
claims.
The claims and more people believing and more requests for investigations. And then it just slowly dies off some as all these TV shows quit.
What is the latest craze? And it wasn't a thing that people were focused on in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. But once you get to the late 20th century and into the 21st century, now all eyes and ears are on the paranormal and wanting to experience that. And it's a modern day desire to see and know and have proof that there's life beyond.
Right. And you know that when people are doing these ghost tours or whatever, they're going to bring out their cameras. They're going to try to look and, oh, look, I got a ghost and it's a dust orb.
Yeah, there's that hope. You want to capture that image, that no doubt, that leaves you without any doubt that you've captured evidence of a ghost.
Right. And the whole reason why Fort Sumter is being brought into this series, because we're going to get into Bull Run and Gettysburg and some of the others. They have a lot more of those stories. But the reason why Fort Sumter is so important in the Civil War history is just because it was
Where it began.
Exactly. Exactly. So it was the birth of a war that reshaped America as we knew it. So we can't leave it out.
What's really interesting about Fort Sumter is the initial battle, again, had very few casualties, and most deaths occurred later during those Union bombardments, and the paranormal claims are largely anecdotal, which is part of the skeptic viewpoint here. When you have few casualties and anecdotal stories, it's not a lot of hard evidence. But when we get into some of these other locations and battles, we've got so much more to cover.
I even have a cool video that I found. Well, a few of them that I found that I can't wait to show you and get you to analyze them.
Yes, because I'm sure I can debunk it.
Maybe, but maybe not. I know. I see the look that you're giving me.
Yes, and there's a few out there. Well, let's see. I'd love to dig into it because I hope there's something out there one of these days that I can't debunk.
Right? Well, one of these is really before you start to have the rise of good technology with camcorders.
Right.
So you can see it's not like the quality today that you would have.
So it's older.
It is older. And so some of those older things can't be finagled like they can today.
Certainly lower quality can have pareidolia.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah.
This video has been out on the internet for a long time. And I remember seeing this several years back even, and that did make me stop and scratch my head. So
Which case is that one for?
I can't remember right off the bat. I'll have to go back and look. And here's the thing. I know that we don't have all video evidence and all photographic evidence for each of these things because capturing really good evidence, I've gone through and I've looked. You're not going to find them on all of these cases. You're just
because
not.
photo and video is extremely rare and can be debunked easily.
Well, correct. I figured we'll do an analysis of some of the ones that I have picked out for us to go over.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, then maybe I'll stump you up. I don't know. Maybe I won't.
So if you're not already following our Facebook page, you need to see the videos and our Instagram, which also has our videos and photographs for you to review as well.
Right. And each of these episodes that come out on the Civil War ghost and sightings, I will post those pictures to our Facebook and Instagram page for those cases only. Well, you have to wait till the next one comes out to be able to see the one coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot to come, obviously, and there's the potential for some of the evidence that's out there to be something we might scratch our heads at, but there's also a lot that I could debunk.
Maybe. This will be a multi-series. So as we start to get into these different places, again, there's going to be a lot more landmarks, a lot more places along the way, more casualties. And we'll get into all those and get all the claims. It's very interesting. I've been enjoying doing a lot of this research on it. And of course, all the ghost stories to me are fascinating. But I will say, I'm not going to believe it until I can see it.
Right.
So one day, maybe I'll get to visit.
Ooh, she's getting a little skepticism here.
Just realist.
No, so we hope you stay tuned to our Civil War series, if anything, for just the amazing history and the potential that it leaves for paranormal activity. Yeah, so listen in next week and we will get started on
Bull Run, which will expand even more Civil War history and these ghost stories. Now, you won't want to miss what's coming up next in this series.
So you can share your own para stories, topic suggestions, and comments to psychic and skeptic all spelled out at gmail.com. And you can find us wherever you enjoy your podcasts. And thank you for listening.
Because you know, the paranormal is the normal.
Not yet understood.